everybody, welcome to my channel, The Magical Solution. My name is Lailani, and this is how we grow. I'm really excited. Tonight is Sunday night, which means we have another wonderful interview tonight, and I'm going to be hanging out with the wonderful author, Fio Gede Parma. And this book that I was given to by his publisher was, I want to say, like when I first got it, I wanted to say that I wasn't sure what to expect, because The Witch Belongs to the World, A Spell of Becoming, which is the title of the book, has this beautiful artwork. And when you open it up, there are just little spritz of wisdom and, random sentences that will really just catch your eye and make you pause and stop and think. And so at first I was like, this is a book of poetry. This isn't like your typical witchy how to, here's some spells, here's some things to follow kind of, format. It's very much an artistic expression, and specifically one of the author. And I'm really excited to share this book with you guys today and to bring Fio on. Now, before we do, though, let's talk a little bit about him. Fio is a Balinese-Australian witch, international teacher, and magical mentor. Fio is a co-founder of the Coven of the Wildwood. So they are a midwife and initiate of the Wildwood Tradition, as well as an active initiate of reclaiming an Anderson fairy. Fio has also authored and co-authored 6 previous books, including Elements of Magic, Magic of the Iron Pentacle, and many more. And of course, you can visit Fio at fiogedeparma.com. All that information will be found in the description below, as well as a link to where you can purchase this wonderful work of art. So let's bring this amazing person on.
Hi.
Hey there.
Hi.
Welcome to my show. Welcome. Thank you so much for saying yes to my invite and for coming on tonight.
Sure.
So, this book. This book. Let's talk about it. Let's start from the very, very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you, and why this book? Why now?
Oh, wow. Well, I think it's really, I actually think it's simple. I am a witch, and I've known that since I was 11, and I just gave myself. I wrote this silly Facebook post the other day. I was like, oh, 23 years ago, witchcraft, like, I think I said something like, witchcraft came for me and I said yes. Like, to a lot of us, it does feel like that. It does feel like the force that is witchcraft, not exactly as an external force, but the kind of intersubjective dynamic force that is witchcraft kind of erupts out of you, right? And I've always felt it to be that way. I've never really felt it primarily to be religiosity or spiritual tradition or any of that, really. Of course, it can be those things, but witchcraft is a happening, a phenomenon. And so it erupted through me at such a young age, as it does with several people, many people. And this book is my 7th book. It's my 4th solo author book. And it had been some time. It had been a decade since I'd had a book that I wrote on my own. And I do that because, of course, I think we do it with the spirits, but come out, right? So I wanted to kind of, even though I've been teaching nonstop in various continents online, like I'm a consistent teacher of magic and spirit work.
Oh no, you guys, we're having a moment of technical difficulty. Just give us 1 second. I got you back. I don't know. You just cut out for a second. But we only missed like the last minute of it. Are you there?
Yeah.
What
It's
a weird one. The energy is big tonight, it seems like.
yeah. Yes. I'm not sure what the last thing I was heard being said. Anyway.
That you needed to write this book. This was
Yes.
yes.
This is true.
And
I did.
it shows. It shows. When you go through it, it definitely sounds like you're reading it through almost through your eyes. Now, when you say a spell of becoming, what do you mean by that? What
So
does that book mean?
yeah, it means something like becoming the witch, and also like becoming to life, like constantly endlessly unfolding as a living being. So I think
Yes.
there's this idea of I guess in Western kind of reductive culture, there's this idea of A to B, that you progress in this linear fashion, right? And then you achieve this, you accomplish this, you solve this, and then you kind of graduate. But I guess for me, the craft life is a spiral, is a labyrinth. And I think a
Yes.
lot of us know that to be true, but I hadn't always seen that in book form. And there are several other authors who do that excellently and profoundly. But I also wanted to contribute to those books that were able to kind of weave a spell of labyrinthine becoming magic, like endlessly unfolding becoming magic, which is what this is. And it gives, ideally, the book gives invigoration and power and love and agency. And really, it's a love song, a love spell, a love poem to witches. Like I so love the craft, and I so love being a witch, and it's such a beautiful, powerful thing to be witch. And I wanted to like express that in like a really emotionally rich, guttural way.
Yes, I love that. Now when you're writing for the witches, to the witches, um,
Mhm.
are you writing to a solitary practitioner? Are you writing to a group of people? Does this book, in terms of the becoming, the spell, this idea
Mhm.
of reading through it, meditating over it, and integrating it,
Mhm.
is that best done with a group or best done solo?
I think actually it's best done. I think the book is definitely written for an individual to go through. I like there are other books that I've participated in writing where it's definitely almost more fertile to be in a group. But this I think is more fertile and dynamic to kind of be alone in it with your spirits, with the land, the sky, and the sea, with your ancestors and the gods, and that the book really brings that up. But ultimately, I think after one reads it, they could bring the insights back to their coven or back to their group. And I think that that would be probably the richest, most dynamic way to do it. Like
Oh, for sure. It's like a hero's journey.
I can imagine people bringing it back to their groups and discussing it, but I'm trying to imagine people doing it in a group because it's so self-paced, and I think it would just be very. I guess you could check in every month and see where you're at, but some people would be at page 10 and other people would be at, the middle of the book. So it's like, it's so self-paced.
So the reason why I asked that question is because as I was going through it, there were instances in the book where I felt it spoke specifically to that solitary, even like eclectic type of witch that we see in the community that oftentimes gets ostracized because they are not part of a coven or
Hmm.
because their ideas are not structural, that they're
Hmm.
very much cherry picked from place to place.
Hmm.
And your book kind of does speak to that a little bit in a very positive way, and that was kind of the reason why I asked that question. And also because on the internet right now there's a huge sort of movement towards this idea of shadow work, because of course everyone heard about Carl Gustav Jung for the first time yesterday.
Hmm.
And so like now we are on these discussions about shadow work and facing our inner demons and things like that. And you actually have some information here regarding
Hmm.
demons, regarding fallen angels, regarding those shadows. Can you speak a little bit on those subjects?
Yeah, I mean, so I have I definitely have a chapter about the fallen in love angels, and I definitely have a chapter about shadow work and demon work. I think they're different, but I guess in the cultural zeitgeist, they're not, right? Like a lot of people out there influenced by kind of popular Christian understanding, would say that fallen angels are demons. But I guess what I'm getting at in the book is the history and the mythography of it, which is that, like, the word demon is in itself, even when witches and occultists use it, we're using this word that once just was quite neutral or quite beautiful, like daemon, like that's where that word comes from. And it just meant like divinity or spirit. And suddenly this word demon, which comes right from that word, is used in this really negative way,
Yeah.
to distinctly refer to malevolent spirits, of which, you know, I say in the book, there are malevolent spirits, or at least spirits who don't wish humans well. And again, in the eternal cosmos, that's fine. Like,
Yeah.
do I think highly of humans? Not all the time, and I don't put us at the center of any cosmos either, like some religions do. You know, humans are just one of infinite species or beings or whatever. But I guess the thing I really wanted to get out in this book is my understanding of the fallen in love angels, or the fallen angels. There's this idea that they fell from grace, but in a lot of witchcraft lineages and traditions, we don't think of it that way. We think of them as the fallen in love angels, or that's the poetry I use. I've seen different ways of referring to it. Other people would just say, oh no, they didn't fall at all. Whereas I say, oh, I'm going to go with this story and talk about what does it mean to fall in love? We say that in English. What does that mean? And then also, what does it mean for these bright ones of the upper world to come down to the middle world, or to fall down from the heavens into the earth, bringing their power, their fire with them, and then marrying that fire with what I call the red daughters. Some people would call them, in the Book of Enoch, it's the daughters of man. It's written that way in the translation. You know, and the daughters of humankind. And this is said to be, and has been said to be, the origin of witches for centuries. People have held that idea for a long time. It's not the most popular idea inside of a lot of modern witchcraft traditions, but there are definitely traditional forms of the craft that I am privy to where that is one of the most important ideas. And so I wanted to write about that. But a lot of witchcraft mystery, you can't point at it. You can only write poetically about it. That's the thing. Like, you only poeticize about it, because there's no way to point at it. And to point at it would be to kind of almost it can't remove
it's like almost devalues it in a way.
Yes,
yeah.
Yeah, it's like, and there's just so many ways of talking about the craft today. Like, I do think that the craft can be so many things. I see all of these kind of basic witch books out there, and I mean that in like a neutral sense. Like, I think I've seen a book called that, and I can see how those forms of witchcraft are connected to what I know of as the phenomenon of the craft. Because witchcraft, she will adapt herself to allow for a range of realities. And so if witchcraft is for someone the reclaiming of their life force and their authority and their sense of divinity in the world, and that's it. That's it. And if it's about courting the planets and the fallen angels and marrying gods and talking to fairy people, and that's it. And also, some people start in one place and they end up in an entirely different corner of the cosmos. So, and and then there was I work in reclaiming, which is kind of got its threads in multiple places. Like, it comes out of Anderson Fairy, it comes out of Wicca, it comes out of the feminist movement, it comes out of the psychology development movement. Like, it has this like connection to so many kind of regions of being human. So I know that the craft can do that. We can kind of move through and as so many infinite pieces of being human and being alive.
I love that. And that's yet another reason why it's lasted. That's why it's persevered. That movement is evolution. You know what I mean? It goes with the times. And if it can't, it hides. And it does so in a way that will preserve. So, I think, wow. Yes. You can only really poeticize it. You can't really point at it. You really can't. So then if that's the case, when we're speaking about things that we can do to come back to ourselves and reclaim our power and remember, if you will, who we are. What does that have to do with our physical body? Like what do we do with our physical body in this pursuit? Because is it all cerebral? Is it all emotional? Is it all spiritual? You know what I mean?
Well, my answer to that is it's all of it. So like I actually wrote a whole chapter about the body. So thank you for that segue. So for me, I guess another big points of this book was to get across the idea that body and spirit are continuum. Like I really, like I personally do not use language that separates or even distinguishes them. And so I would say often that the body is deeper, wilder, wiser, and richer than we know. What we are taught of as to perceive, what we are taught to perceive as the body is a reductive mode of thinking. Like that's conceptual, that's historical, that's cultural. But the body, the witch body, the cosmic body, the labyrinthine body, filled with multiple souls, different cauldrons in the body. I have a whole technique in the book about aligning the three souls within the three cauldrons, within the three worlds. This is to help someone magically, emotionally, intellectually, fully comprehend each day, each night that we are, a moving, breathing force. Yes. And that the body changes, shifts, ages, is born, but that through and with all of that, many mysteries are revealed to us. And yeah, and it's complicated. Bodies are complicated, but the other reality is we only experience through body, like that, and then the body changes, So at death, the great mystery of death, the body changes. I don't think we shed the body. I think the body changes once more. When we're born, the body changes. So, and this is true on a chemical level. This is true on a physical level, on a traditionally physical level. And so the physical is the spiritual, the spiritual is the physical. There is no difference. And I think the more we try to do that and kind of parcel it out, the more we're really kind of fragmenting ourselves. And sometimes it can be useful to, I guess, to say, this region of the experience of body, we can say that. But then if we don't follow it up with, but inherently all things are kind of chaotically whole, if that's not the context, and for hundreds of years in the so-called West, it has not been the context. The context has been this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece, and they're all like cogs in a machine. Historically, we know that idea was present, this mechanistic model of the universe. But really, the witch belongs to, that's why I called it The Witch Belongs to the World. The witch belongs to this dynamic, unfolding kind of like Leviathan kind of situation. And again, I kind of use two creation stories and I compare and contrast different interpretations of them in the beginning of the book as well. One from the book of Genesis and one drawn from the Aradia, but also from fairy tradition, reclaiming, Wildwood. There are so many parallels. This idea of darkness coming to life, coming to light, and kind of haunting ourselves with like desire, which rumbles and quakes all things and brings all things into being. And so nothing is separate from anything. Sometimes things get distinguished, but they're still held in the cauldron of the experience of body. And so I would say that in answer to your question, it's all of it. Like all of it. It's all of it. It's hitting every portal. It's hitting every perception.
It's funny. I was just having this conversation with a friend recently about how mystics and witches and those of us who really spend a lot of time diving into these spaces have all come to the realization that it's really just dancing with the paradoxes and understanding that we live in a very boom, this and this kind of society right now, this type of paradox, and it's a balancing act. It's a salsa dance, and we constantly have to go through in order to get out, or we have to go in order to come out. And I think the body and the physicalness of our world is where the secret is. The witch isn't just someone who casts spells and plays with herbs and things like that. You know, there's that connection with nature, that understanding that nature is this sort of this paradox that we have to live in. But she supports us, loves us, and is also the darkness. So speaking of that, you have a chapter, and I'm curious to sort of pick apart this idea. I don't want to say gender or gender roles, but this idea of like, where do, you know, as the witch is living in this space, where does identity play this part? And if the spirits help with that, or if this work helps with that.
Oh, I think it totally does. And again, that's how I even came to understand the body, through my own experiences of being non-binary and being a queer person. Like, and we know, like people who are paying attention to history and culture, we know that prior to European colonization, that all of these primary intact cultures, all of these indigenous cultures have and had and continue to have and revive these traditional roles and traditional understandings of multiple gender. And so when we understand that the body is not this mechanism, is not this machine, and is not just this thing that is born and we go, this is this, and we assign it a gender, and we say, this is how you'll function in society. But when the witch has always, even prior to Christianity, always there to provoke and kind of like remind the rest of humans that nature is various and dangerous and constantly changing. And that's the witch function. The witch function is to remind the rest of humans that we as nature, we're not separate from nature, that we as nature continue also to refine and change and evolve. And so to understand that the body is a deep well is to understand that in our journey of ourselves, we'll discover hidden things that come up, and we're like, oh, what's that? And then we get to work with ritual, relationship, myth, folklore, story, connection. We get to work with all of that to place ourselves in the web. And those things can be very liberating and freeing. And I think the only thing about gender that is ever oppressive is when there's a greater structural society that's trying to order things so that people are kind of basically held to a certain assumption based on the ordering. But if you can break out of that, that's really terrifying to a lot of that's very terrifying. And no wonder there are societies that have tried to stop and hinder and continue, like in the US, like right now, try to subjugate these gender variant realities from emerging, because it threatens patriarchy. Because if you suddenly are like, well, you can express in the way that's authentic to you, then this has ramifications for the patriarchy, because then they're like, but we need you to have gender roles, we need you to have children, and you to not care about children, and you to care about children. Like, you know, that's the reality.
Yeah.
And you need to go off here and get the money, and you need to just stay at home, and we know who we're talking about. And it's like, and when you really think about it, it becomes obscene. It becomes obscene, because the caring of children is everyone's duty. It's
cooking
not just
for yourself is everyone's duty.
Yeah.
Eating.
Yeah. So all of it is everyone's duty. And this idea that it's relegated to certain people is ridiculous.
So ridiculous. Yes, to all of that. And that's another reason why I made the flyer the way that I made it, you know, with the match. Because it's true. It's like this idea of, in a sea of black and white, there's the woman in the red dress, and that's the witch, you know. And that's the one who sees society from an objective point of view and sees, okay, something is wrong here. And honestly, everyone has that ability to objectively see what the fuck is wrong, of course.
Yeah.
But who has the balls to do something about it? And historically, it has been, you know, these very outcasted, very blunt, very outspoken type of people.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of them were women,
Yeah.
women with,
Yeah.
with gifts to heal and medicine and all that good stuff. I was having this conversation too with a friend of mine who was a Babalao. This was years ago. And I remember asking him, I said to him, I said, I've been hearing a lot on like social media, Facebook, all this, that like men cannot be initiated into or have like a female crown and women cannot have a male crown. And he was like, where did you hear that mess from? And then he goes into like this whole thing about, how the stories or the batakis, these stories, yes, they have characters that are feminine, masculine. Yes, there's roles that are being played out in these stories, because let's not forget where they were written and who they were written for. But these stories were genderless and that they were for everyone.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's exactly the case when it comes to witchcraft, whether you're initiated, whether you're a solitary practitioner. It's this idea that all these spirits, you have access to. These spirits will care for you, will love you, if that's the relationship that you guys are destined to have, whether it's male, female, whatever.
Yeah.
And your identity is very much your own. Your book is amazing. And I recommend it. And I want to ask, when it comes to, this is a question that it was a very small piece in the very last chapter, but I was like, this idea of, how do I say it? Was it the last chapter? No. But it's this idea of spirits that you're born with and spirits that come in and out of your life. But basically my question is, in this book and in your quest to become, what are the actual roles of the spirits, if any, for a witch? Because there are some witches who don't acknowledge spirits at all. They just kind of work with I've heard of atheist witches. So I'm curious what your take on that is. Like,
well, first of all, of course, I've heard of such witches too. I think if a witch is going to go out of their way to say they're an atheist, I imagine it's a socio-political comment. Not anyway.
I know where you were going with that.
I find it. I'm gonna just say what I'll just say what I mean. Look, I find it really, really I find it strange that anyone would identify as a witch and not truck with the spirits. Like, to me, a witch is someone who is intimately working with spirits. Also, I get a bit passionate about the idea that, like, because witch has meant something throughout the centuries, and one of the things that witch has meant is this consorter with forbidden spirits. However the society thinks about that. Like, that's an important thing not to just throw out. Like, that would be to throw out so much of who we are. And so spirits form, to me, the crux of so much of what we do as witches. We fuck with the spirits. We also fuck the spirits. Like, those of us who are erotic, which many of us are. Like, I know asexual witches, but those of us who are erotic, I do have that relationship with the spirits. I talk a bit about the fetch mate in there, which is a concept that came to me through my work with Lee Morgan, another amazing Australian witch. And the fetch mate is basically this idea that there is, for some of us, it's not true for all of us, but this idea that there is like a primary familiar spirit who is entangled with us throughout space and time. That's how I experience my fetch mate. A lot of the poetry in my book is straight from him. Sometimes I'll write directly underneath, I'll say from my fetch mate. And other times it's like with him that I'm writing it. I also have a soul goddess, and that's a term that I wrote about first in Ecstatic Witchcraft, which came out in 2012 and is going to be reissued next year through Crossroad Books. But I didn't want to. I knew of the idea of a crowning orisha. I knew of the idea of the master of the head, and I'm not involved in those traditions at all. But I started to see that a similar concept was happening to people who aren't involved in those kind of African diasporic traditions. And so I didn't want to just be like, well, I'm going to call it that because that's ridiculous and disrespectful to me, and I don't fully understand what crowning means, right? But I can talk about what I know to be a soul god or a soul goddess, which is like the idea that there is a being for some of us, a deity who you kind of can't tell where you begin and end with them. And that to me is Persephone, and I've written about that in my other books. And so she is my soul goddess, Soul. And then I talk about the inner court of spirits, which I know is like a idea. I know that some people talk about courts of spirits. So I talk about the inner court of spirits. A lot of witchcraft traditions, we talk about inner courts, outer courts, which is just a functional way of saying those who have passed through the gates of initiation and those who might. That's all it means. And then, so there's an inner court of spirits that I have, that I think we all have. And, mine changes, but the primary players do not change. My fetchmate is always there. Persephone is always there. Aphrodite is always there. The sacred four of the Wildwood are always there. Certain ancestral spirits are always there. But other beings might come in and out of the inner court. And so you can start to see it. Like, I encourage people who work with me to draw maps, like to spirit map this. And sometimes you can also do it with concentric circles. Some people really need that kind of like very structural concentric circle thing. And so you have your inner court, you have like the second circle out, you have the third circle out, and you can intuitively, ecstatically take yourself into a trance and just start to automatically write and draw in all the circles. And then you can kind of come out of the trance and see what you've done. And that gives you an amazing idea into like what your map is right now. And I tend to do this for myself every 6 months to kind of go back into what has changed here. That's an exercise I really, really love to invite people to do. So spirits and gods do have places. Like, I do think that it's possible to be a witch and work only with the elemental spirits, but I would still say you're working with these elemental spirits.
For sure.
And then there are witches I know who are definitely witches, but they're kind of scared of the spirits because they're raised in these Christianist cultures that tell them to be terrified of spirits. Like, you can be a witch, and I mean, most witches I know are raised in those places, and there is that terror or like confusion or paranoia. And so I spend a lot of time helping people to work through that. A lot of my work is actually really helping people to work through that so that they can have
deconstructing.
And decolonizing. It's so colonial.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The deconstructing, decolonizing. I think that's the work of the era, honestly, for all of us. I think, when you speak about a witch becoming and also that person that sort of leads the movement of change, that's a big one. And people like Julia Diaz, I mean, there are just so many people out there that are doing so much work for the decolonization and the deconstructing of these paradigms and this religious abuse that so many people have gone through.
Totally.
So I'm so honored to be a part of that community of people and people like you, of course, writing wonderful books as this. So again, to those of you guys in the audience, if you do not know what we're talking about, or if you're joining us for the very first time, this is Fio Gede Parma. We are talking about their new book, The Witch Belongs to the World, A Spell of Becoming. All of the information will be in the description below, as well as a link to purchase the book. Now, I need to know, what are you doing with your life these days? Now, granted, I know this is a new book and you're still going to be pushing this out and you're still going to be talking about it and all that good stuff, but is there any other fun things in the horizon? Are you expanding on this? Is this going to be part of a series? Like, what's going on?
I love that. Look, I do have 2 books coming out next year. One is a reissue of an older book, Ecstatic Witchcraft, which I'm so excited to have back out there. And then another book, I won't reveal exactly the topic just yet, but I will say it links to one of my previous co-authored books. Yay! So that book is being written with Jane Meredith, and who I've written or co-edited 2 books before. So that's exciting. And look, I continue to teach. Like, one of my biggest the thing that I do other than writing that I kind of mainly do is teach and mentor. And I travel a lot for that, and I do it also through Zoom, and have been doing that since before the pandemic. I remember when the pandemic swept through and everyone was like, Zoom, what's Zoom? I was like laughing because I was like, oh, everyone's joining me on Zoom finally. Like, I was like, finally. Because I'd been teaching on Zoom for so long and people were like, what's this Zoom thing? Whenever I would send them a Zoom link. So there's always that, you know, and I was just in the States. I got back a month ago, and prior to the pandemic, I'd been going to the States every year, you know, to be with beloveds, to be with community, to teach, to mentor, to be. And I, you know, it's an interesting, as someone who grew up in so-called Australia but has spent a great deal of time in Turtle Island, so-called USA, like I think it's a very interesting thing. I like that I understand that country to the level I understand it, but it's also like, whoa, you know, and every year it gets a bit more whoa. But I think it's a sign of the times in a way. Like, it's like this is a total kind of different trajectory, but I feel like the rise of witchcraft like is just also a symptom of something else, you know, like there's a rise of witchcraft, there's an intense like kind of return to the ancestors in the face of like the collapse of this empire.
Yes.
You know?
It's kind of dope though. I mean, this is a really exciting time to be alive. You know, it's there's a lot of craziness, and I'm saying this with all due respect because I understand that there are people dying right now as we speak because of these things. But it's an exciting time to be alive. It really, really is. There's so many crazy changes happening, and again, the witch being sort of that match, that light to help move things forward. I think it's wonderful. You know, you mentioned like when you were teaching and working with people, especially with regards to spirits, you had mentioned like a lot of fear, right? With regards to this book, with regards to becoming, how do we cope with fear? How do we deal for those moments when fear comes up, or when we have those moments of imposter syndrome, or when we feel like being a witch is fairy tale and it's like, what are we doing? You know, like what do we do with that?
Well, I would say yes. Being a witch is fairy tale. Looking, what is that though? Like if we consider that, like, what is a fairy and what is a tale, or what is a fairy and what is a story, then absolutely, that is true. But in terms of what you're saying, like in terms of the doubt or the imposter syndrome, I think that's normal. But the other thing is that, again, it's about the paradigm that the world is in. Certain models of thinking and believing are very recent. And what I like to remind people is that most humans on this planet to this day believe in and experience spirits all the time. Most humans throughout Southeast Asia, throughout what we call South America, throughout a lot of Europe, throughout all of Africa potentially, throughout much of all of these humans believe in and experience the spirits as saints, as ancestors, as land spirits, as plant spirits, as the star spirits. This is normal. It is so normal. And really what we have to be scared of are the human systems that are poisoning the earth and raping the earth's resources, quote unquote. That's what we have to be terrified of. Like, this idea of paranoia of the spirits is so ridiculous to me, but unfortunately it's infected so many people's minds. And this, I always encourage people to like notice where the doorway of paranoia is. I'm like, do not go through the doorway of paranoia. Like, if you go through that door, you're gonna see fucking evil spirits everywhere. Like, because that's gonna take you over. Like, that doorway of paranoia is gonna take you over. Like, all you have to do is have a really, really strong, consistent practice of honoring the land, honoring your ancestors, working with your animal soul, your fetch, your divinity, in whichever way your tradition, culture wants to talk about that. And then from that place, also have a little bit of understanding of how to do protective magic, banishing magic, like the old school shit. And then work with your spirits, who are going to be your ambassadors, who are going to be your protectors, who are going to be your initiators. And just always, if there's a stranger, like any stranger, often though, you should be more concerned about the ones in your city, human living ones. But also, don't write people off. But if there's a strange spirit coming at you, you've got the basic tools, and you can ask, who are you? What is your name? Why are you here? These are, and ask, and then you can say, if something's off, you know what to do. You know how to protect yourself. You know how to banish. You know how to call up your spirits to protect you. Or at the end of the day, all you have to say is, I call the I am that I am. I call God herself in the name of the infinite, be gone. And again, that's why I think that works for some charismatic Christians, this idea of in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, in the name of Christ, because really they're talking about in the name of that cosmic power of love, in the name of that most holy, awesome, dreadful, wondrous, creating force. Yes. All spirits have to bend to that. So it's so whatever you're invoking through your emotional power, your ancient foremothers, whatever it is, they're real, and they will come and protect and defend you. And really I have seen a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of stuff that horror movies make me laugh, because every time I actually saw this British horror film last night, because every time I'm like, oh, if you just called a competent witch, this situation would have been 10 minutes into this movie, but I get why you have to faff around, otherwise there wouldn't be a movie. But it's so true. Get a competent spirit worker, a competent, espiritista or whatever. You bring them in, because then this would be solved. Yeah. But so really, the witch is the most primed person. A lot of people are like, oh, witches, portal to evil. I'm like, actually no, a witch, most primed person to deal with your bullshit.
I love it.
And certainly the bullshit of people bringing up spirits and not knowing what they're doing, but also that is really rare. You can fuck something up and it might get a bit weird for a few days, but it's quite rare for it to become truly antagonistic. And when it does become that way, there are so many of us to call upon.
It's
people would be surprised how many witches, spirit workers there are in their neighborhood.
And how we're so quick to ready to fight the fight too. If you ask us for help, we're like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, it's kind of fun for us sometimes.
Yeah. So being a born native Australian, how does
I was born in Bali, actually.
You're born in Bali.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then how does that your ethnic and your traditional background, how does that play into your witchcraft?
Oh, absolutely. I always say the same thing. I grew up, even though I was born in Bali, raised in so-called Australia, but my parents are still married. I still am connected to Bali, and I've lived there as an adult, traveled there many times as a kid, every year. Bali is a Hindu island. The history of that is interesting, because most of modern day Indonesia is Muslim, but Bali remains Hindu. Even though the island to its left and right, if you look at a map, Muslim. So that's very interesting. But it's the kind of Hinduism that Bali grew is a very syncretic form. It's very syncretized with the indigenous, animistic traditions, with a particular kind of Buddhism, with particular strands of tantric, Buddhist, and Hindu ritual. And I grew up in a family that knows that spirits are real, that practices mediumship, that practices spirit flight, that has certain prayers, mantras, mudras, ways of moving the life force, certain techniques of ritual. So all of that, and the idea that certain people are endowed with potentially more power in that way, like my grandparents were. And so that context was my context, possibly why it was so easy for me as an 11 and 12-year-old to be like, oh, this is because honestly, when I realized I was a witch, it felt like my destiny. I was like, oh my God. And I just leaned all the way in.
It's no wonder.
Yeah, exactly.
This all makes sense now.
Yeah, and I remember telling my mom as a little 11, 12-year-old, and she went, that makes sense. So just to have your parents kind of go, yeah, of course you are. Just like your grandparents, kind of, that idea. So I grew up that way, and I grew up a Hindu, and I don't fully identify that way anymore, but it's because I don't Hinduism impacts me, and Balinese Hinduism in the same way that I think some people who grew up Catholic culturally, they're always a bit culturally Catholic. I'm always going to be a bit culturally Balinese Hindu. Like that's, and I don't want to remove that. You know, there are certain things about kind of Hindu cultures that upset me, like the patriarchy is strong, and certain ideas of like dirtiness and sacredness. Like I'm like, no, not for me, sorry. But I really love the philosophies. You know, a lot of modern pagans and witches are always looking at Hinduism to try to understand how pre-Christian European cultures might have turned out, because really Hinduism is, you know, what we call Hinduism is exactly that. You know, it's this polytheistic, pluralistic kind of spirit working reality, right? Did I disappear again? Oh no.
Hey guys, sorry.
Hi.
I'm telling you, them Hindu spirits were like, stop talking shit about me.
I mean, yeah. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. This doesn't happen every day to me.
No, but I love it. I love, because my husband is Hindu, and we got married in India, and it definitely was a culture shock. Like, I get it. You know, you were just starting to talk about the patriarchy, and I was like, I feel you.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating culture, and I agree with you. Being born as a Catholic, it's true. As no matter how witchy and mystical and fun I get, like in that area, I'll still be a confirmed Catholic.
Yeah.
And it plays a role.
Yeah, and it gives you, I think also you can take power from it.
For sure.
You know,
for sure. The one of the things I will say about the Catholics is that they got that ritual ceremonial stuff real down pat, you know. So we are in our last few minutes on the show, although most of it was taken up by the internet messing up on us, and I apologize for that. So thank you for being patient. But you know, are there any last words that you'd like to give to the audience, especially people? I know technically, you know, this isn't really a beginner book in the sense that it's not in the format for a beginner to really take heed, but everyone should read it for sure. And I feel like if you are someone who is trying to figure out who you are and what your place is and what your purpose is and what it means to you to be a witch and all that, the existential crises that we have as magical practitioners, this is a great book to definitely sit with and meditate on and practice. And the author here, what would you like to say to our audience, whether it be about your book or about our conversation or just any little bit of nugget of wisdom you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would say life is short, go for it. like really, like if you're feeling drawn to something, you want to practice it, you want to study it, you want to, whether it's dance, whether it's visual art, whether it's druidry, or whether you feel like deeply kind of drawn to a yogic tradition or a witchcraft tradition or whatever, consider your place in that. Consider your place in that context. Consider your relationship to that place, and be as respectful as you can, because some of us, you know, you might be drawn to something you're not culturally, ethnically, that's not your background maybe, but I do think it's fine and dandy, and it has happened forever that people are attracted to things that maybe they weren't born into. That's fine. Just be respectful and move in the time and pace of the tradition, of the lineage. Like, so don't, like, too many people, especially a lot of white folks out there, feel very owed. They feel very entitled to certain things. Like spirituality is not to be consumed. So like go in the pace of what you're learning. And that's like this book. Like The Witch is not to be rushed. You know, the witch can get magic happening really quickly, but the witch herself, the witch ourselves, the witch who belongs to the world, that you might be one. Like go for it, but don't rush. So it's like, again, it goes back to that paradox. It's like fully lean in, fully dive in, but don't rush yourself. And be like, really like take the time to, like, 3 things really at the beginning. 3 things. Ancestral veneration. You're going to hate some of your ancestors. I do. That's fine. You know, some of your ancestors, like mine, behaved very badly. But you can venerate your ancestors. You can even elevate your ancestors. You know, so take time to be with them and to be with who you are because of them. And maybe also you need to reflect on that. I come from a settler lineage, and also a very, intact kind of Balinese lineage, like living in indigenous homeland. So I come from both of those lineages. It's really important for me, who lives in this country, which is stolen from First Nations people, like it's really important for me, and I write about that in this book. It's really important for me to be with that and not ignore that. Like that is part of my magic. So I'd offer that, and I'd offer that working with your fetch, working with your animal soul, working with the reality of being embodied here and now. That's really important. Witchcraft is not a game. It's not to take you out of that. And then the other thing as well is to be with the life force. The life force is everywhere, in the rocks, in the trees, in the sea, in the concrete, in the flowers, in the pollen that you might be allergic to, in the birds, and that we working with that, with breath, with meditation, with singing, with dancing, with whatever works for you. Like do that. Like start there and learn how to weave and work with the life force mindfully. Work with your fetch, your animal soul, and work with the ancestors. And that's a great beginning.
That is a wonderful beginning. That's a wonderful little trifecta of awesomeness. Great advice. Great advice. Wonderful book. I want to say thank you so much for the wisdom that you shared with us today, for coming out and chatting with all of us. I want to say thank you to all the viewers. Let's see a few people here. We have Zelma, we have Elmira, we have Lovetta, Michelle, a lot of people here showing love, and definitely people that are going to be watching on the replay. I'm so excited for that. Make sure you guys like, comment, share, subscribe. Make sure you purchase this book. Once again, it is in the description box below. But if you want the name one more time, The Witch Belongs to the World, A Spell of Becoming by Fio Gede Parma. And once again, thank you so much, Fio.
Thank you.
This is how we grow, you guys. Have a good night.